Okay, picture this. A world just completely transforming, like overnight. On one side, you have factories churning out this unbelievable amount of wealth, smokestacks reaching for the sky. But on the other side, the very people making all this happen are trapped in just crushing poverty, working these brutal hours in huge, crowded cities. It's this dramatic, stark contrast, and it's the world that gave birth to a really powerful, and let's be honest, a very controversial idea.
So today, we're going to trace the journey of this idea, an idea that has shaped nations, sparked revolutions, and continues to fuel intense debate right up to this very moment. We're talking about socialism. And you know, it all really began with a single, fundamental question about fairness that grew out of that world of stark contrasts.
Right, so to really get socialism, you have to go back to where it all started, the Industrial Revolution. I mean, this was a time of absolutely incredible progress, but that progress came at a staggering human cost, and it just carved this deep, deep division right through society.
As people saw these immense fortunes being built, literally on the backs of their own grueling labor, a pretty simple but profound question started to echo through the factories and the city streets. Hey, if we're the ones creating all this wealth, who should get to enjoy it? Should it just be the owners, or should it be all of us? And that question, it led to a search for an alternative, an idea that was really centered on sharing and cooperation. So this brings us to the core principles of what socialism actually is before it ever became a massive political movement.
So what even is socialism? Before we dive into all the complex politics and the history, let's just strip it all back to its most basic proposal. At its most fundamental level, socialism is this. It's the idea that the things we all need to produce goods, the factories, the land, the resources, they shouldn't be in the hands of just a few private individuals. Instead, they should be owned or managed by the community as a whole. And the goal? Well, it's to make sure that the benefits serve everyone, not just a select few.
Now, this whole concept of collective ownership wasn't just born in the industrial era. I mean, the idea of sharing goes way, way back. But in the early 1800s, these thinkers that we now call utopian socialists, they actually tried to put it into practice. They designed these model communities. You might have heard of Robert Owen's famous factory in New Lanark, hoping to prove that a cooperative society could actually work. But for the most part, these were seen more as, moral dreams rather than serious political strategies.
But let's face it, a philosophical dream just wasn't enough to challenge the powerful forces of industrial capitalism. The idea needed a blueprint, a real theory of change. And this is the moment where socialism transforms from a nice ideal into a full-blown revolutionary movement.
Yeah, that utopian dream pretty quickly gave way to the harsh reality of the Industrial Revolution. The tension was just building, and then it exploded in 1848 with the publication of a document that would, no exaggeration, change the world, the Communist Manifesto.
This is where Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels walk onto the stage. They looked at all of human history and they saw one consistent pattern, a struggle between classes, a conflict between the people who own everything, the means of production, and the people who have nothing to sell but their own ability to work.
And here's how they broke it down. They saw capitalism as a system that just by its very design has to exploit workers. It pays them just enough to survive, while the owner gets to keep all the extra value that the worker creates. Marx and Engels argued this would just inevitably lead to massive inequality and instability, and that capitalism was basically digging its own grave, setting the stage for a new socialist system.
Okay, so with this powerful new theory in hand, the idea of socialism went global. It jumped right off the pages of a book and into real-world action with vastly different approaches and, as we'll see, vastly different outcomes.
Almost right away, the movement split into two big camps. On one side, you had the reformers. They believed in working within the system. Winning elections, forming unions, and gradually passing laws to create a more equal society. But on the other side, you had the revolutionaries, who argued that the system was just too corrupt to be fixed. For them, it had to be overthrown completely.
So in countries where socialist parties did take power, especially through revolution, the changes were dramatic. We're talking governments nationalizing key industries, taking them over from private owners, and then using central planning to direct the entire economy. The results? They were incredibly mixed. Some nations, like the early Soviet Union, they saw super rapid industrial growth, but others suffered from just massive inefficiency, shortages, and economic stagnation.
And those mixed results, they bring us right to the debate that is still raging today. For every single promise that socialism makes, critics are quick to point to a potential peril. This is really the central tension of the idea when you put it into practice. So supporters will point to socialism's potential to create a more just society, right? Reducing that gap between the rich and the poor, guaranteeing basics like healthcare and education for everybody. But critics raise some really serious concerns. They argue that all that heavy state control can crush individual freedom, limit consumer choice, and really stifle the kind of innovation that drives economic growth.
So where does that leave all of us today? Well, the idea of socialism certainly hasn't disappeared. Not at all. Instead, it's evolved, it's adapted, and its legacy is very much alive and kicking in our modern world.
You'd be pretty hard-pressed to find a country today that is a pure Marxist state. Instead, what we see are the ideas of socialism blended into other systems. Think about democratic socialists who work completely within democratic frameworks, or the many mixed economies you see in Europe that combine a capitalist market with really strong social safety nets funded by the state.
And really, if you listen closely to our political debates today, you can hear the echoes of this entire journey. The arguments for universal health care, for massive government action to fight climate change, or for new taxes to reduce wealth inequality, all of these draw from that long tradition of socialist thought about the role of the collective in solving our shared problems.
Ultimately, I think it's helpful to see socialism less as one single, rigid blueprint and more as this ongoing conversation that's been happening for centuries. It's a tradition of asking that fundamental question about fairness, about human dignity, and about how we can best achieve prosperity not just for a few people, but for all of us.
Which, of course, leaves us with the final question for the future. As we confront these new, incredibly complex challenges, everything from AI's impact on jobs to global climate crises, the very questions that sparked socialism in the first place feel more relevant than ever. The search for a fair economy is far from over, and how this idea continues to evolve, well, that will surely shape the world to come.